Hello, creative, and welcome back to the Empowered Creatives podcast, finding confidence between hustle and burnout. I'm your host, Victoria Hines, creative career coach, helping creatives just like you level up or find their next path in your career. Oh, I'm so excited to have this episode today because part of why I wanted to start this podcast is this never-ending journey that I've been on, that every creative I know has been on, to find balance, which I know to an extent, balance is a little bit of a myth. There's always going to feel like there's something out of balance or not quite operating at the same level. But you can probably pinpoint those times in your career or your life where everything really felt out of balance. It just felt like, your ship that you're on is about to teeter over and fall into the abyss of the ocean and sink to the bottom. Those are the moments that, as much as we are able to, we want to mitigate or avoid or notice when they are starting to happen. So I want to share with you this moment in my life where I felt incredibly unbalanced in my career. So I'm going to take you back to 2016. So I'm a couple years out of college, and that year, towards the end of it, I was working 5 part-time jobs. I was working part-time in arts administration, so I had just booked this gig. And to be perfectly honest, I was making, I think, minimum wage in Chicago, which sounds great in other parts of the country, but really wasn't a whole lot of money. And I needed other forms of work in order to make ends meet, in order to pay my bills and be making the same amount that I had been making in the restaurant industry prior. So I was working in part-time in arts administration. I also was doing freelance murder mystery shows on the weekend, which the pay was okay, but they were a lot of fun and it was super easy to do at times. I was also doing medical acting. So there were days where I was driving 45 minutes over to a hospital to do medical acting for these nursing students. I was babysitting and picking up babysitting gigs, and I was doing other gigs. I can't even remember every single sort of like part-time gig, but pretty much anything that had a decent price tag on it, I was probably saying yes to. On top of that, I was going to as many auditions as possible. I was hopping into theaters and I was putting myself out there and saying yes to as many staged readings, theater gigs as possible. Long story short, balancing all of this also felt like a job. I probably spent hours in my week just trying to figure out all these schedules and how I was going to puzzle piece them together within the week. So in 2016, this was okay for me. I was lucky enough, I was still under 26, so I had health insurance through my parents. And I knew that for a time, I could make all of this work. I will say, though, not many of these jobs had room for growth. If I looked at most of them, what I was making at that job was probably all I was ever going to make. I wasn't going to get a raise. I probably wasn't going to work more hours. I could maybe pick up more gigs here and there, but again, I was trading time for money. But for the time, I was also growing. I was gaining capital. I was gaining all of these skills, especially in the arts administration world. I was gaining improv and performance skills from the murder mystery shows. Not much maybe from the medical acting and babysitting, but it was helping to pay the bills. So in 2016, this was fine. But a couple months in, I very quickly realized there was a timestamp on this. What I was doing was not sustainable. I really didn't have much time, energy, or money to create. Most of what I was doing was running around town, just trying to show up for my gigs on time, meet new people, and pay the bills. So again, this was okay for a time, but there was going to come a moment, and I knew this, where I could no longer balance 6 part-time jobs on top of each other. What I have later come to understand or understand is that there are three major resources that every artist needs to create. We need time, we need energy, and we need money. When one of those is out of sync, when one of those is depleted, and it doesn't matter which of the three, we feel out of balance. And there is a limited amount of time where we can live in that unbalance before we have to switch it back the other way. So this podcast is going to dive into the three resources you need to create, why they're important, how they affect your work. And I'm also going to give you some resources that might help you explore a little bit how to maybe turn this resource back into more of a balanced state. Real quick, I'm going to interrupt this podcast to tell you about a really nifty tool that I've made just for you. As creatives, it's so easy to find ourselves lost in jobs that we don't really like. So much so that when we decide to find a day job or support job that we actually enjoy, we have no idea where to start. This is where a creative career audit comes in. Head to the show notes below to grab the link to my download, and you can get your free workbook that will help you identify what brings you joy and what drains you in the world of work. No more day jobs or support jobs that make you just feel inside. It's time to find something that's going to light you up again. So the first resource you need to create is time. As a creative, I remember feeling terrified of committing to any sort of work that would take time away from auditioning. And I know other people that feel this way. I know writers feel that way about writing. I know artists feel that way about painting. But I was so afraid of losing time and space to network, to go to these mass auditions in the city. I didn't want to commit because I just felt like I needed all of this flexibility to show up when somebody else needed me or wanted me. The funny thing was, though, if I look back at those 6 jobs I was balancing in order to pay the bills, I was probably spending more time running between those different jobs and showing up to those different jobs than I would have in a full-time job. So if you're in that boat of feeling like maybe your time is strapped, I want you to also take into account it's not just the jobs you're showing up to, even though they're flexible, but how much time are you spending commuting between those gigs? How much time are you spending coordinating schedules? The other big question for yourself is it worth the money you are making? Now, all of these things are part of the art of being a freelance artist. Usually as a freelancer, you are patching together a bunch of different gigs and forms of work. But the thing I want you to realize also as a freelancer is if you are a freelancer, you are also an entrepreneur. You are running your own business. And I think that's the piece that most of us as creatives miss as a freelancer. We think as a freelancer, we almost are still stuck in the 9-to-5 mindset of we are beholden to the people we work for. We are beholden to the bosses. We are beholden to the jobs we can get. We are beholden to say yes, otherwise the money won't come. But I think there's a lot of power in flipping that mindset on its head. As a freelancer, you get to say yes to what is worth your time and what is not worth your time. And that is a very, very, very hard concept to flip on its head. I quickly realized that if I look back at my schedule from 2016, I spent 7 days a week with back-to-back calendar commitments. If I wasn't hopping between a job and a job and a job, I was going to see a theater show. I was running around town just trying to network, trying to meet people, trying to immerse myself in the theater scene, in the art. I was going to classes and I was working. And I was exhausted. I kind of was operating under this idea that I had this freedom of time, which sure, I did. I could have said no to a gig. I could have canceled the gig and gotten that time back. But my bank account, my money was depleted, and my energy was very depleted. What I've come to realize now is there's a lot of benefit in realizing what is your ideal schedule? How do you want to be spending your time and taking ownership of that time? Every single one of us, we all have 24 hours in our day. And I know you've heard this before, and it's easy to get into that comparison trap of like, oh, they're able to do so much more with their time. But I want you to take a step back from that, step out of the comparison trap and ask yourself, what is your ideal schedule? You may not be there today yet, and that's okay, but how much time would you enjoy spending doing the different activities throughout your day? I think there are two different sorts of creatives as well. I think there's some of us who are overschedulers, we're planners, we're type A sorts of people. And we benefit, this is the box that I fall in. I benefit from having unscheduled time. My most creative work actually comes from unscheduled free time. So what I have to do is I have to purposefully choose one day a week that gets nothing on the calendar. I don't make commitments. I don't make plans. It is an empty day to do with how I choose. Those are the days where I get to show up to my hobbies, where I get to paint, where I get to bake. Maybe I even think about my business and build some things or create something in that world. But that is how I tap into my creative energy. I also know the opposite is true. If you find yourself, strapped for time and going throughout your weeks and never showing up to your craft or never showing up to your art, sometimes you need to be maybe a little bit more deliberate, a little bit more stringent of carving out that time to create and deliberately setting aside time for a task. I know time is one of those resources that we always feel like is strapped, but there is a lot of power in taking ownership of it and realizing that the art of busyness, declaring to the world that you're busy, isn't actually, it's not a stamp of success. Showing the world that, hey, I'm busy and I'm running around and I have a lot of things to do, it doesn't equate happiness and it doesn't equate the amount of work that you are actually producing. Little thing to think about. So the second resource you need to create, which we all have a love-hate relationship with, is money. Ooh, money comes with a lot of feelings as an artist, which if you haven't listened to my guest episode with Laura Sexton, that's a really great episode. She's a financial coach who is also a former actor. And we talk a lot about money and money mindset and financial freedom. I think the most important thing to remember is money is not the enemy. The more you can realize that money is a neutral object. It's not positive. It's not negative. It is just a thing that we use to pay for essentials. In the society that we live in, we need money to pay for food, water, and shelter. And every single one of us as human beings, we all need those things at the very basic level. What's really hard as a creative is we get stuck asking for just enough. I know I did this for years. I was like, what's enough money just to make ends meet? What would be just enough to get paid hourly so that I could pay my bills? What's enough? I've had so many conversations with artists, stage managers, comedians, people who are transitioning maybe into like a full-time job from their freelance life. And every single one of them often brings up, well, I'm making enough. Or if I make X amount of money, that would be enough. The funny thing is just asking for enough is mean that you are strapping or bootstrapping yourself through making a living through your life. And oftentimes when we use the word enough, I think we get caught into this trap of like, okay, if we ask for just enough, then we'll get that. That's an easy enough ask. And by asking for just enough, therefore, we will have the time that we want to create. Those two things I don't think are actually correlated. I think that's a myth there. When we fall into that starving artist mentality of asking for just enough, that doesn't necessarily mean that we end up having the time and the freedom to pursue the work that we want to create. It doesn't give us the freedom that we are creating. We end up feeling, when you don't have enough money, or when you've asked for just enough, which usually as artists, that's a pretty low number. I know for years it was a very low number for me. We end up feeling stressed, our energy gets depleted, and our mental health deeply declines. I've seen this happen to me in my work, and enough quickly becomes not enough, very, very quickly. I've also seen it happen to countless friends where they are financially strapped and just trying to make ends meet over and over and over again, and none of it's sustainable. I will say, if this is a point in your life that you are at, it's okay to be there. It's okay to be in the place where you're just trying to make ends meet, you're just trying to pay the bills, and giving yourself the grace that where you are at is okay is the first step, especially if you're financially strapped. But eventually, where you want to get to is thinking a little bit bigger and thinking a little bit more, because that's how you're going to grow out of it. I would also challenge you to ask yourself, there's a difference between how much money do you need and how much money do you want? It can be a really powerful exercise to recognize, what's the gap? What's bare minimum and what would be a dream? Oftentimes, where you want to exist then is somewhere in the middle. We've all been subjected, because of the world we grew up in, because of the culture, because of the stories we've been told, we've all been subjected to that starving artist syndrome. We've been programmed to think from a place of scarcity. What can I live off of to just get by? What's barely enough? I want to challenge you, though, if money is where you are feeling depleted and you don't have enough of those resources to create what you want to be creating, I would challenge you to start growing that number just a little bit more. A really great book, if you're wanting to focus on money mindset, that I found really helpful is You Are a Badass at Making Money by Jen Sincero. So if this is an area where you're wanting to grow and expand in the world, highly recommend grabbing that book. The third resource that we don't often consider is energy. How much energy do you have to spare at the end of your week, end of your day, to create? One of the biggest depletions of energy is stress. I want to quickly tell you about a job that I was working at, and for a while, it was right for me. But what started happening was this job that was paying the bills, that gave me health insurance, the stress levels kept heightening day after day, week after week. I found myself having to spend more time outside that job, de-stressing. I found myself having to spend more time meditating. I found myself having to find more ways to give myself self-care just to get through my weeks, to get through my days. Oftentimes I was getting those Sunday scaries, and I was waking up in the mornings. And when I drove to work, I would often sit in my car for 30 minutes just to muster the energy to walk through the door. Needless to say, I didn't have any spare energy to create. All my energy was going to that 40-hour-a-week job that was paying my bills. It was giving me the money I needed. And I had a decent amount of time, but all of that time, the spare time, was going towards re-energizing myself just to get through my week. Eventually, I had to ask myself, okay, I'm giving this job time, and they're giving me money, but it's depleting my energy. What am I getting out of this? And in reality, I had hit a ceiling. I don't know if you've seen that photo, but it's don't try shrink yourself to fit into the places that you've outgrown. That's the way this job felt. I wasn't growing anymore. I didn't feel like I was able to impact the business in the way that I had in the past. I was giving a lot of feedback. I was giving it a lot of advice. I knew I had a lot of strategic thinking on how to help them. But at the end of the day, I don't necessarily think it was being respected or heard, which depleted my energy in return. And in all reality, even though I was getting paid a decent amount for a first time job, I wasn't getting paid enough for what I was worth. I had outgrown that pay, and there were no signs of a raise in sight. Everything about showing up to this job and this form of work was draining me. What I've come to realize after stepping away from that position and walking away are there actually forms of work, there are tasks, there are things that you do, there are pieces of work that inexplicably you can't name why, but they recharge you. Coaching is that way for me. I can have back to back to back calls. So I can be in 3 hours of calls and then have an hour of follow-up work to do. And oddly enough, I feel energized afterwards. Hosting rooms on Clubhouse was the same way, or recording this podcast. Yes, it takes time. Yes, it takes energy. But at the end of it, I don't feel drained. Marketing, on the other hand, is not that. I love you, social media. Like, I think you're great. I love connecting with people, but marketing drains me. Creating content, posting it, staying on top of it, that is something that at the end of the day, it'll take my energy away and zap it. What can be really beneficial is leaning into your strengths in your work. Whether that gets to be your creative craft full time, or maybe you do have to have that day job that gives you the money you need in order to pursue your craft. But the more you can lean into your strengths and minimize everything else, the more energy you are going to have at the end of your day. There's kind of this weird hop from college into the real world. I think we go from so many years of school where so much of what we do is focused on improving our weaknesses. We're told what we're not good at and what we need to work on. But in the real world, in all honesty, the more that you can lean into the things that you're really, really good at, the more energy you're going to have at the end of your week. A book that I highly recommend if you're feeling low on energy, if you're feeling overworked, is a book I'm finishing right now. It's called Do Nothing: How to Break Away from Overworking, Overdoing, and Underliving by Celeste Headley. So if you're in that boat where your energy is really depleted and you're feeling like you're running around and none of it's filling you back up again, highly recommend this book. And it might be something that helps you. So as a little recap, the 3 resources you need to create are time, energy, and money. At the end of the day, the likelihood of all of these 3 things being in complete balance 24/7, 100% of your week is slim to none. But I want you to think of them as like these little lines, these waves. And they're going to alternate. Sometimes your money's going to be a little bit more depleted, but your time, you have more time and you have more energy, and that's okay. But eventually, as time passes, maybe you need to let go of your time and get that job that's going to pay just a little bit more so that your money goes back up again. All of these are waves that the more you tweak them as you go along, the more you're going to find them hitting center. So here's your one thing this week. Out of the 3 resources, time, energy, and money, which resource feels strapped right now? What's the timetable for how long you think you can sustain this imbalance? Is it a month? Is it a couple weeks? Is it a year? How long can you sustain the imbalance? Now, what would be possible If you had more of that strapped resource, what would you be able to do? So I want you to go back to your timetable and I want you to put that date in your calendar. So if you said 6 months, I want you to go in 6 months from now and I want you to write a little reminder to yourself. And I want you to write down, I need to find more X. So put in the resource. I need to find more time, energy, or money, whatever it was for you. It could be 1, it could be 2, it could be all 3. I need to find more blank so that I can blank and add in what's possible for you. That's just a little reminder to yourself that however many days from now, that's when you want to relook at that piece of your life and figure out how to get it back into balance. All right. If you're enjoying the pod, here's my shameless spiel every single week. Please do subscribe, rate, and review. It's the best way you can show your support in a really free, easy way. Also, if you're enjoying the pod, feel free to share it with a friend. I'm sure you have creative friends who are feeling financially strapped, time strapped, energy strapped, and they might really need to hear this episode and the resources provided within it. With that being said, until next week, stay creative, my friend.